It is the biggest public works project ever in Kenya, a $3.8 billion bet on the country's economic future. Sealed on a deal with China to help build a sprawling rail network in East Africa. They call it the Madaraka Express, after Kenyan Independence Day. And in its first year of operation, it has given Kenyans new freedom and optimism. A 10-hour drive time between the coastal city of Mombasa and the capital, Nairobi, slashed by half or more.
Really, there are not so many complaints comparing to the transport system that we're used to.
Shipping costs slashed by half too, a shot in the arm for business and, hopefully, new jobs. The train, more widely called the SGR, for Standard Gauge Railway, is a critical link in something far bigger. China's massive Belt and Road Initiative, a $1 trillion plan to finance and build railroads, ports, roads, and other huge projects in nearly 70 countries. China casts Belt and Road as a friendly effort to help emerging economies like Kenya's. But the deals are boon for China, too. Chinese state banks lend the money. Then Chinese companies cash in on construction deals.
So these infrastructure projects are not altruistic aid projects. What the Chinese get out of it, or what Chinese companies get out of it, are lucrative infrastructure contracts where not only Chinese construction firms win these contracts, but they also pull along a number of smaller suppliers and other Chinese companies that also get to participate.
Belt and Road projects are certifying China's ascent to the top trade partner for African states.
If anything, it's an acceleration of existing trends that we've already seen for the past decade or more, where China has already overtaken the US in terms of being the primary economic partner for African countries and for the continent as a whole. Africa does not take the same priority in US foreign policy as perhaps it used to, and it doesn't occupy the same sort of attention. Whereas for China, the relationship has become, over a decade or more, very politically institutionalized.
And African countries are getting a payoff. An extensive survey by McKinsey Consulting found that thousands of Chinese-owned firms, some big, some small, are hiring, training, and promoting tens of thousands of African workers.
It's a win-win for me. If we don't have the standard gauge railway, if we don't have, we're going to be losing as an economy. The government, if they become lenient, we go back to our 80s and 90s, we will never grow as an economy.
Kemboi's story is one the Kenya government wants to reproduce. She landed a good-paying job after graduating from the railways training school.
Well, with the SGR training, I think we have trained close to 1,000 graduates who are currently running the standard gauge railway. Our graduates who will be handling the cabin crew, the maintenance, the passenger operations, all the people that will help in the running of the trains have actually passed through this institution.
Kenya hired Chinese state-owned companies to build the railroad, then operate and maintain it for up to 10 years, when enough Kenyans will be trained to take over.
如果是在国内的话，就是3、5年吧，就说3年是副司机，5年才能成为司机。他现在才学习了还不到1年呢，这个状态下，他们现在是见习副司机。
Another success story, Edgar Sirucha, a Mandarin-speaking civil engineer. He was hired by China Railway Construction Corporation to work on roads.
I studied in China for my bachelor and master degree, and it was in engineering. And to see a country that has been so developed, I carried the dream here, and I hope that one day I'll see a Kenya that is just as developed or even further developed than China.
But the SGR has also become hugely controversial. Most recently, the arrests of Kenya Railways managing director and the country's land commission chief, accused with others of fraudulent SGR property deals. and their complaints that the Chinese kept the best-paying jobs for themselves, mistreated Kenyans in lower-skilled positions, even segregated them in cafeterias. Kenya Railways and lawmakers are investigating the treatment of workers. The officials accused of land fraud pleaded not guilty. For his part, Sirucha said tensions sometimes do surface on the job, but they can be overcome.
Coming here, of course, there are challenges where I've got people who complain the pay is low, I've got people who complain the hours are long, I've got people who complain the Chinese don't treat them right. Everyone has a reason to complain. But if you have a vision, you have a driving force that makes those problems be actually stepping stones.
Kenya's economy has been growing, but not as fast as neighboring Ethiopia, where the Chinese also financed and built a railway. The government is counting on the SGR to deliver. Already the line is being extended to connect with proposed industrial parks and eventually reach into Uganda. James Macharia is Minister of Transport, Infrastructure, Housing and Urban Development.
Well, as you know, the plan is to make sure that SGR contributes about 2.5% of GDP. You've seen the impact of the transport from Mombasa to Nairobi, both for passenger and for freight. And so by the time we finish the SGR up to Malaba, it will be adding another 2.5% of the country's GDP.
Other Kenya Railway and government officials declined VOA's interview requests. So did the SGR's builder, China Road and Bridge Corporation, and the Chinese embassy. In Mombasa, officials say cargo traffic is growing thanks to the SGR's lower costs. Until recently, Catherine Mturi Wairi was managing director at the Kenya Ports Authority.
We are looking at $250 for a 20-foot container and $300 for a 40-foot container. And compared to trucks, you're looking at between $700 for a 20-footer and $800. So it's definitely cheaper to go by rail.
But what's good for the SGR isn't good for long-haul truckers. They say the train has already cut into their businesses.
والله البزنس أول كان الشغل تمام يعني السيارة تروح من هنا إلى كامبالا يوم تنزل الكونتينر ترجع تو تحصل الشغل بس يوم صبر هذا الSGR شغل تعب مرة والله الفيوتشر بيكون صعب والله.
Officials say that in the end, truckers will benefit as container traffic increases at points inland.
The railway can only take up to 40% of cargo. So you will find that whatever is taken up by the railway line ultimately has to be trucked to some place.
The SGR's economics depend on more than cargo and passengers. To build the railway's first leg, Kenya borrowed almost all the $3.8 billion cost from the Chinese. Same for the next section, now under construction. Another $1.5 billion. The debt makes China far and away Kenya's biggest lender. Repayment was forgiven for 5 years, but in 2019, loan obligations to the Chinese will rise more than fivefold. Critics fear the debt will make the SGR a long-term loser, a victim to China's debt trap diplomacy. Akshay Vishwanath is an environmental activist who studied SGR finances.
Any business, any country, any economy uses debt to grow. But the magnitude of that debt, the ability to repay, the magnitude of those loans in comparison to the gross domestic product, all does matter. And I don't think that level of analysis has been conducted for these projects. And therefore, I say we need to worry.
SGR passengers already are paying 70% more for tickets than when the train launched a year ago. One of the SGR's fiercest opponents is Okia Omtata Okoiti. He has filed lawsuits alleging Kenya failed to do sufficient economic or environmental studies. Instead, he said the government bowed to the Chinese.
With the Chinese, everything is negotiated in China. The money is paid in China, like the SGR money is supposed to have been paid in China. What is brought to Kenya is the debt.
Omtata said China should be working to lessen financial risk for African states that take part in the Belt and Road Initiative.
So that you can have a developed China and a developed Africa. But you're going to end up with an undeveloped Africa and a collapsed states in Africa with a thriving China, which is the main problem we have.
Across Africa, the needs are great. The Africa Development Bank said countries face an annual infrastructure funding gap of some $70 to $108 billion. China has pledged $60 billion in financing for Belt and Road projects in Africa.
So there's some justified skepticism on the part of the World Bank and other international financiers on the economic viability of some of these new railways. Estimates for the economic viability of the Kenyan railway really depends on whether or not the targets for freight can be met. This, in a large part, will depend on how well the Chinese and Kenyans can cooperate in localizing skills and knowledge to operate and maintain this railway in order to make it sustainable.
It's too early to say whether the Madaraka Express will be an engine of progress for all Kenyans. But there's no doubt it's already a win for the Chinese. Nearly 4 million people live in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. Perhaps no big city has such an abundance of nature right at its back door.
This is like what Central Park is to New York.
Trish Hayes has been a Nairobi National Park fan for many years. On the border of one of Africa's fastest growing cities, it is home to endangered rhinos, lions, buffalo, giraffes, more than 400 species. The British first protected the land in the 1940s, and it has remained unspoiled. Until now.
Respect our laws, respect our animals,
Kenya's government is extending the country's new Chinese-built railway straight through the heart of the park, splitting the cherished preserve in two and igniting a firestorm. Opponents say they were blindsided. Until his death earlier this year, Sidney Kuntai led the coalition fighting the route. He said construction started before most Kenyans understood where the train would go.
In the last 1 year and a half, witnessed a very big threat to the Nairobi National Park. This matter was kept in the dark. All Kenyans knew about was phase one of Mombasa to Nairobi.
Chinese contractors erected massive concrete pillars, an elevated track visible from one end of the preserve to the other. The railway, known as the SGR, is a vital link in China's trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, a massive effort to build railways, roads and ports linking China to Africa, Asia and Europe. China said it hopes to lift emerging economies like Kenya's with new trade and manufacturing. But there's also an environmental price to pay. According to the World Wildlife Federation, hundreds of threatened and endangered species stand in the way of China's construction plans. Critics say that in the rush for jobs, Kenya's government failed to properly study the environmental impact. Lawyer Okia Omtata Okoiti joined conservationists in legal action aiming to halt the extension.
So I got orders stopping phase 2 until we had a few basic minimum, a few basics in place, like an environmental survey to understand what is the impact of the SGR on the environment. A socio-economic survey, what's the impact of the SGR on the communities where it is going to pass.
But ultimately, the challenges lost in court.
All these things are not in place, and the Chinese are busy blasting.
The Kenya Railways Corporation and Chinese builders declined to answer VOA's questions or agree to interviews about Nairobi National Park. But the Kenya Wildlife Agency did allow VOA to visit the Tsavo National Park in central Kenya to see the SGR's impact there. The railway's first leg, from Nairobi to Mombasa, opened a year ago. It cuts through the 5,000 square mile preserve. A busy highway and older rail line already split the park. The new train adds yet another obstacle, disrupting wildlife migration and attracting human squatters. Dr. Ben Okita is with Save the Elephants. He is helping Kenya Wildlife to study the environmental effects.
One major impact that the SGR has had on the ecosystem, and that is to do with interfering with the contiguous environment and ecosystem. So it's contributing to further splitting of Tsavo East and Tsavo West National Park.
The Chinese built 8 high overpasses to allow wildlife in some areas to move freely under the train. To see if they're working, Okita uses GPS collars to tag elephants and track their movements. His maps show signs that the animals are confused.
There is crossing, but then you can see there's some sections here where the animal tends to be struggling. Yes, they are doing a lot of pacing here. So you see it's quite dark red here. So as much as they want to cross, they just can't. They just keep pacing.
Making matters worse, humans are drawn to the overpasses because they create park access for livestock and scavenging.
And because of those human settlements, when animals want to come through, they reach a point where they're scared. When you're coming in, you saw people walking around here. Then that underpass eventually is rendered useless for wildlife to use.
The Chinese built concrete and wire fence guards the track from animals, but they are failing.
This outer fence line is hardly 1 year old, and you can see it's already seriously damaged by wildlife. And because of that, the risks of wildlife crossing over the railway and causing accidents are very high.
Now, all the original fencing is being replaced. Alex Mwazo of Kenya Wildlife Service is on the research team at Tsavo. He said most animals, zebras, buffaloes, antelopes, even lions, are slowly adjusting. One exception, the giraffes.
The only species so far which we have not recorded and seen utilizing the underpass is the giraffe. Now, giraffes tend to be a shy animal, so it will take time before they actualize and gain the confidence and start utilizing the underpasses.
Lala Frederick is the leader of Mwazo's research team. Although buffalo and other animals have been hit by the train, Mwazo said SGR is less of a risk than trucks where the highway also splits the park.
The main problem is not even the railway. I think the road that is just adjacent to the railway is the main problem, because it's just like a brick wall.
While scientists studied the impact of Tsavo, Kenyans looked on with alarm as the train cut Nairobi National Park in two. Their protests in March came too late. By that time, Chinese builders had bulldozed into the preserve, quickly erecting an imposing row of towering pillars to carry the overhead track. Eventually, the route will extend north to the Ugandan border. Longtime neighbors say the government turned its back on the park's heritage. Kitengela Glass sits at the end of a long dirt road in Olusekron, south of the park. Owner Nani Crows has collected newspaper clippings documenting every twist of the railway construction.
They had so many different maps, and it was, I'm sure, to confuse people because nobody knew when were we going to be invaded. President Uhuru Kenyatta had asked those with land through which infrastructural projects are passing through to surrender it. Otherwise, the president said the government will forcibly seize it.
Crows said something precious is being forever lost.
We have so few animals, wild animals, African animals. Where do you find them? In Kenya, maybe a few in Tanzania, maybe a few, not even Uganda anymore. And how can you, this is such a treasure. This is the treasure of the world. And here we come, and then you sell it to the Chinese for a railway? Bloody hell.
But for Nairobi National Park, it appears there's no turning back. From its placid coastline and glistening savannas to its urban chaos and slums, Kenya is a land of great beauty and contradiction. As Kenyans work to boost their emerging economy, they have become partners with the Chinese, taking on billions in Chinese debt for Kenya's biggest construction job ever, the standard gauge railway, the SGR. On May 31st, 2017, Kenya opened the first phase from the port city of Mombasa to Nairobi. Construction of such a massive project is guaranteed to disrupt and dislocate. VOA traveled the route to meet the Kenyans in its wake and found that not everyone is happy with the country's new train. This is Mariakani, a small town near Mombasa, one of the first places Chinese contractors began building the rail line. The Roman Catholic primary school was in the way. The builders demolished and relocated it. The government's Kenya Railway Corporation promised a bigger and better school. But this construction stalled. 4 years later, students go to class in iron and steel sheds. The school, unfinished. Landowners in the way were promised compensation. KTU lives in Mariakani. His family's cemetery was in the railway's path.
Shamba hili la familia kwa wakati huu mimi ndo namiliki kwa sababu ndio ni mtoto wa kwanza, niliobaki ni mtoto wa kwanza wa mzee Katana Wangoka. Alafu hii ndio Katana Ngoka, ndio mzee wa hii boma huyu. Babangu sasa huyu. Huyu ni mkubwa wangu. Jina lake ni Abdalla Mangali Katana. Kutoka kuzaliwa yeye ndo mimi.
KTU says the government made good on its promises.
Sisi tulikuwa tunangojea ipite na tuone tutalipwa vipi. Walituambia tutawalipa kaburi moja 50,000, alafu mfanye mila za kikwenu, muondoe polepole kwa sababu reli itakuja kupitia hapa. Kama mtungi hivyo kwenye ile post. Hiyo mchimbo hiyo vile kama tingatinga vile lilichimba zilikuwa pale. Ndio tukatoa pale, tukazipeleka pale. Pale umeona sasa. Yule ambaye aliathirika na hiyo standard railway gauge alipewa cheki yake na akatoa pesa yake ile ambayo ilikuwa imeandikwa kwa cheki na akatumia kwa mahitaji yake mwenyewe binafsi.
But elsewhere on the route, Kenyans told a different story. Complaints about noise and disruption, and anger about lack of land compensation and jobs.
This is on Sunday at 7 p.m. and these guys are doing this. So let me ask, when are we, the residents of this area, meant to have a peace of mind and a rest from all this? God help us.
Grace Kimani lives in Olusekon, southwest of Nairobi National Park, where the SGR is being extended in Phase 2. The construction blasts shaking the earth cracked the walls of her house. She worries it might cave in on her 2 daughters.
Our houses are basically falling apart. That is the damage that they did on Friday last week, courtesy of their very heavy blasting. This one is through and through. From the kitchen outside, you can see it. And it's gone all the way down to the foundation. This is the result of that crack on the inside. Because when you look at this crack, and I can actually see the light from inside. But they keep on saying that since they are blasting, there's nothing much they can do.
Well, what if something happens to you and your family, then what?
That's the question that no one is answering us.
David Kadenge bought land in Olusekon 18 years ago for the beautiful view of Nairobi National Park and the city beyond. In no time, he said, the Chinese contractors changed the whole landscape.
some of the most beautiful scenery you ever have of Nairobi is here. You'll never see Nairobi like you ever see it in any other place. This view is gone. We could see that whole view, but now the mountain is rising. And we're told this railway is going to be much higher than this at this area. It's going to be about 30 to 40 meters high. So we're going to have a wall of concrete that blocks our view.
About 30 kilometers southwest of Nairobi is Gong, a town once inhabited mostly by the Maasai, nomads who once controlled this part of Africa before colonial times. As it slices northward toward Uganda, the SGR carves through Maasai country. China Road and Bridge Corporation, the railway builder, took 26 acres of land in nearby Kimuka for a temporary headquarters. Construction brought a drastic transformation and discontent. Baba is a respected Maasai elder who has owned and lived on his land in Gong for more than 30 years.
No, nothing. They were told to wait for government, and they are still waiting for government up to now.
More recently, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta ordered his government to speed up compensation for landowners. Here, livestock, farming and tourism drive a fragile economy. According to Maasai locals, the Chinese contractors promised jobs. But most workers, the locals say, came from China and other parts of Kenya. They said they also were promised new roads, a hospital, and clean water, so they gave up rights to their land without realizing all the consequences. China Road and Bridge Corporation has said that 9 of 10 construction workers are Kenyans. Tension over jobs have triggered protests and violence. In one incident, 200 local youths angrily confronted Chinese rail workers. Journalist George Saige has covered multiple clashes between Chinese and Kenyans in Narok County.
One of them happened to be slapped by the Chinese. So they didn't really take that, because that was the second incident of slapping. They started by slapping the chief, and then they slapped this youth. Later on, they slapped a police officer. There was a real war, actually, and 14 Chinese were injured, and they are brought to the Narok district hospital. The community feel that they are not respected. You cannot slap a man in Maasai.
Another protest turned deadly.
Hapo mahali ilikuwa vijana wamejaa, lakini ilikuwa wengi huko mbele kwa ile gate blue ndio ameshoot hapo.
Local Maasai said a group of men went to the SGR construction camp looking for work. In a statement of condolences, China Road and Bridge Corporation said the shooting on January 6, 2018 was in self-defense to a threatening crowd. But the Kiraison family said their son, Joseph, was not armed. They want the officer who fired the shot arrested and compensation for their eldest son's life.
Amo ada na jiti nero segari amboke da sejode kiyolo alambe serikali kulingana duo kiyolo wejite nkwetete tenetugo na lagwa tenetu lo ngonyana ewi na lagwa meeta sii oltung'ani ong'ori pesho. Ata teniro oltung'ani le serkali, miata orusa piing'or oltung'ani pesho.
Although many Kenyans welcomed the Chinese-built train for its convenience and the hope it will bring prosperity, but here on the route, some say the SGR has only made their lives worse.